Well, first of all, let me just direct you towards the best way to get that. Best sort of touched on this very briefly in the reading for today or whatever, but not as clearly as he does in the first chapter, or else the introduction. I forget if it's numbered intro or one, right? Okay. But the short version of that you need to explain by going into best focuses on two C words. Okay. So one of the classes we talked about this a little bit. But so if you're in the class, you already heard this. So morning class we talked about it. You're on the morning class. Mm-hmm. Did we talk about it? Mm-hmm. Nobody remembered. No evidence. Okay, maybe it was the other one. Conditions and claims about conditions is a simple way to sort of keep it straight, okay? One of those is conditions, one of those is claims about conditions, right? Oh, you know what? I'm just realizing I have this on my computer. That would be helpful as we go forward. All right, so which one is conditions? No, it's the other one actually. So I resisted the temptation to give you a buzzer sound. Sorry. Okay, so we won't do that, but it would have been funny maybe, but maybe made you feel bad. Objective. Okay. And you should reread the first part, just the skimmings where it says this. To focus on conditions, right? So we're taking into research, but sometimes Calvin doesn't do, but a lot of schools do a second class. It's like an introduction class called Social Problems. And that course will be very different than the book we just read. It'll say, like, we're going to talk about poverty, we're going to talk about racism, and we're going to talk about healthcare or something. These are our social problems. These are the conditions that are problems. Okay? The focus on that, right? And he says, the point of the objective, so you need to reread it, is like, just go back to the first chapter and say, that we can sort of objectively describe these as problems, right? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Yeah. It just doesn't matter in your perspective. The sort of claim is like, these are problems. But of course, Beth says, well, that's like a bunch of sociologists, also known as their profs, claiming that these are social problems. Now, I would tend to believe them, but he's true in that, right? Not everyone, say, in this country or other countries, believes that that's a social problem. And Bess is like, really? When it comes to like having a social problems, it's not that the focus is on conditions, it's the focus on people's claims about conditions. So, right? What's that?
Is that a subjective?
That's the subjectivist one. Because what he's saying is that there are troubling conditions all over. Remember he used the example of like heightism. Remember heightism? It's real as far as we can tell. All the evidence suggests you're not doomed if you're shorter, but compared to a taller person, you may experience some form of discrimination if you're shorter. Best point is subjectively, that may be true, but guess what? I mean, objectively, that may be true, but no one's talking about it. No one's coming up with any policy things for it. No media is reporting on it very much anyway, right? No, it's not in the news. It's not. There's no policy work. You know, there is some organization none of us ever heard who refers to like the Short People's Rights Group or whatever. They're saying subjectively we don't have a social problem, right? Yeah, sure. Morally that's a problem or whatever, but like as social scientists, we don't have one. Maybe we should. That's the normative question, the ethical question. You don't need to go on this long. I'm just trying to explain it. Okay. So it's claims about conditions. Similar examples, just to help understanding you don't need to do this, but Chelsea wanted to organize in her group, what did you call your group? For the Designer of Social Movement?
Blonde.
Yeah, so you wanted to organize for blondes to have rights and that to fight stereotypes about blondes or whatever, right? And to some degree, we may sort of have the beginning of a social problem, but in general, we don't really have a social problem because people aren't really taking that too seriously for the most part, right? Mm-hmm. All right, so that makes sense? So what matters is, how that people all of a sudden decide to pay attention to troubling conditions. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Racism, or like slavery is a huge one. Slavery, for a lot of human history, like slavery was no problem. Morally, was it a problem? Yeah, but it didn't start becoming anything people discussed as a problem until people start going, hey, wait a minute, maybe this is a bad idea. Okay, so revisit that and just focus on like explaining a little bit, like it's focused on conditions, claims about conditions. Just explain that a little bit and just kind of mooch off of best in very little of what I just explained. Does that make sense?
I just want to make sure they have it right. It's like objectivist. Is that kind of like taking a social problem in right away and then viewing the evidence or like the claims about it? And then subjectivist is kind of viewing the claims and then deciding if it's a social problem or not? Just very broad.
Say the first one about objective?
Like you said, like professors just say this is a social problem. And then we say, okay. And then later see the evidence about it or the claims about it.
Really focus, because that's an example again, right? So you went from like the first one broadly defined, so I'm not sure which one to respond to exactly, but just talk about it's about conditions, okay? The focus is on conditions, saying that these are problems, and that's objective, right? You really do got to go back and just read. Don't get lost in the points bullet. The like Best is arguing against subjectivist. Just look at like, what does that mean? Okay. It's conditions. Let's use an example. Let me be a little bit unnuanced here. But Chelsea's claiming that blondes are being discriminated against. You may or may not have an opinion on this, right? I don't know. Right? But objectively, Chelsea's like, dude, we have a problem. Focus on the conditions, right? We have a social problem. At this point in time, objectively, she's saying this is a problem. It doesn't matter what people subjectively think, right? Does that help a little bit? We have a problem. Just like the claim I made about race, like, right? A lot of people in America don't think we have a race problem. I made a very objective claim in that week, in particular, saying there's a problem here. It's better than it's been in the past. It's different, but there's still problems. The issue is, she's trying to get the social problems making, because she's now making a claim, if we understand it, right? But remember the 6 points picking together that we talked in the model today? To get a social problem, you really need to sort of get like claims and then the process going. We can imagine, I don't know if Chelsea's tried this or anyone else has tried it. The media ain't reporting on it, right? The public ain't responding. So from like in terms of people's responses, people paying attention to it, that's what say subjectively, we don't have a social problem because people just aren't worried about it. In order to be a social problem, people have to decide to act about the conditions. They have to make claims and people have to respond. Really, Best does a really good job explaining very succinctly, but that's the heart of it. So, to some degree, like more close to home, like for recently there's been a lot of claims in our media. I don't know what media abroad has been like, but all of a sudden, like in Egypt in particular, post sort of revolution and stuff, like all this stuff. In India too, a little bit about like sexual assault and stuff, right? This is probably in various forms been going on for a while. To some degree, we're even doing it here, like with sexual assault. We're just right? Objectively, you said, yeah, that's a troubling condition. But in terms of like the process of people talking about it and trying to come up with solutions to it, doesn't happen until people start talking about it subjectively. And the subjectivity of that, of people realizing it's important, deciding it's important, is what makes it a social problem, not the objective fact. Yeah? I've gone on too long? You don't have to answer the question.
What about the